Hello, everyone. My name is Victor Monga, and I am serving as Governor of ISAC Orange County chapter. Today, I have Tim with me, and we're going to talk about network detection and prevention focused for healthcare who are running IoTs. Tim, why don't we start with your introduction?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Ferguson. I'm a senior sales engineer with Extra Hop Networks out of the Seattle area. I've been with the company for a few years, but I've definitely been in the network and security arena for my entire career. At Extra Hop, we really look at the network as a data source. We want to be able to pull in network traffic, look at those sessions, convert that into what we call wired data, and then evaluate all the different things about it. We really view the network as the closest to ground truth as you can get. And that's important because it can't be turned off, right? When anything's going on the network, it's not like you can shut that off like you can maybe a log or something like that. And that's how we really play into the rest of the environment.
First discussion point we want to start with is going to be we have read and heard about this Gartner SOC Triad, and we want our audience to know more about it. Tim, would you like to give us a quick introduction about this?
Absolutely. I definitely, from my background, we look at the triad as all of the pieces in a layered defense. But all of those layers, oddly, kind of are all important, right? And so when we think about, the endpoints and where our users are sitting, we've had endpoint detection and response for a few years now, as our, antivirus, anti-malware has continued to evolve and grow. And it's a very important component, right? There's definitely data that is endpoint resident, that's interesting, and that you want to get to. Then, we look at it from the network side. And so there's data that an endpoint won't be able to see as systems are talking to each other, that communication. And if they're talking off of the network, there's definitely things that you won't be able to get to because those are endpoints or servers that you don't control. And so the network is really an important piece to add into that, and bringing those two together. When you think about that third leg of the stool, you need some place to take your endpoint detections and your network detections and put those into a system that will allow you to bring all of that together into a more cohesive picture. I've always been a big believer on the security side and even on the network management side that context is king. And so knowing that, hey, I have an endpoint that has a piece of malware, the next question I might ask is, well, where did they get it from? Right. And so now being able to lean on a network piece of information to say, hey, well, I saw that host reaching out to this specific server on the internet. I saw that was a successful connection. This is how they downloaded it. Now I can bring that whole picture together and give myself a clearer understanding of what's going on.
And just to keep our audience in line with the session today, a lot of healthcare companies are running IoTs, and they struggle with, or I should say, they always try to evolve and change their network capture options. What would you recommend or consider for network capture options for a healthcare organization who are running IoTs?
It's interesting as we've continued to move along. I've always been really interested on new technologies as they've come out, new ways of doing things, right? Like I was talking about how endpoints moved from antivirus to anti-malware to now the EDR. We moved from firewalls to IDS to now we've got systems like ExtraHop. But interestingly, network capture has still remained kind of the same, right? It's plumbing that we have to work with. And so, as we all think about spans and taps, that really is still the most consistent way. And in my experience working across many organizations, that's still the way most places are doing it, is still getting spans and taps. And because of the thing with IoT being a fixed function device or something we don't really have control over, it makes it really difficult for us to be able to do any shaping of their traffic or being able to pull details out. But I will say that as we're moving forward, I'm definitely seeing more conversations from a data acquisition perspective as companies are moving into the software-defined networking area. And so it gives us more flexibility. But oddly enough, it's still very much like a span, right? And so that's kind of the way we look at it is how can I reach into the network and grab the data I need? And that's almost always going to be some form of span.
Right, and you brought up a really good point for my next segue. If they're not doing span or they're not able to do span, companies try to choose towards an option of agents. So for healthcare organizations, it's not as simple as just installing agents because some of those endpoints are black boxes. We just can't install anything on it and we can't do span. So they're in this catch 22. What are the options for them to capture that interesting data or network traffic to surface those anomalies?
So we've really been looking at like you talked about other options. And so when we think about steering traffic and how we can capture it, there are ideas where you can segment the network. And so you'll hear a lot of discussion around north-south traffic versus east-west traffic. And so what we've tried to approach is if we're not able to get a span or a tap in place and we're not able to install an agent of some sort, it really comes down to more of a segmentation discussion now where I can corral those devices into an area of the network and then feed their traffic back through a point where I can catch a span or I can place an agent to be able to capture that traffic. And so that's where we're starting to see the idea of management networks and IoT networks. And the power industry has been doing it for years where they've been segmenting their components, the OT network off to specific places. I think that will start to grow. We'll start seeing organizations take on those same ideals, even with things like their IoT. Now in healthcare, it is a little difficult because your IoT network is broad, right? You have a radiology machine in one office or in one clinic. You have a heart pump, or an insulin pump in another section of the network. And so how do you get all of those pieces together? And it really, it comes down to putting some thought into it. But if you are gated by not being able to place spans, taps, or things like that on near where those devices are, the only real option after that is segmenting the network and then finding a way to get that data back out to a place where you can get a monitoring port of some sort.
Make sure your network is segmented. So if you can't do span or tap, if you can't install agents, let's just segment those devices in a way. So that brings me to a point where how do we do device discovery and identification? I mean, I don't know what the best solution is. What would your thoughts around it?
So it's one of those conversations that I get into when I sit down at the table with a team and you ask the question, right? And I think everyone on the line is going to understand. It's like, so how up to date is your CMDB, right? Just like you said, right? So it's been difficult. It's been really hard for us to get our arms around where all the devices are. How do I segment? How do I know what is this place versus that place on the network and what's in there? And so we really view, and I personally view very firmly that being able to auto discover and auto classify devices will really be the turning point for especially these IoT types of devices that we don't have control over, those black boxes. But that will really be a turning point for us to get ahead of the game and look at how we handle everything. Uh, it comes back to, like I said, when I did my introduction, I've done security for a long time, and I started off in the SIM environment where a log was the name of the game, right? You collected a log and you did what you did, but it had a flaw in that you had to know where those devices were. Just like we said, just now, is you have to know where it is. You have to go in and configure it, and it all runs back to the person trying to trying to put information into the system about their environment. And what we really need to do is allow these systems the flexibility to read in the data off of the wire and be able to identify those hosts automatically. And it's a huge uptake. I was really impressed, as we've seen there are a number of companies out there that are doing it now. It feels a little bit like magic, right? Oh, I know that that's a specific type of camera, or that's a specific type of conference phone. And years ago, it wasn't such a huge concern, right? Oh, it's a phone on a desk. But now all of these devices are small computers, and you can SSH to them. You can run a web server off of it if you're crazy enough. And so it is important to understand and have the systems, because we just don't have the manpower or the people today to be able to do that cataloging and refresh, right? New devices are coming on the network every day, and old devices are being recycled out, and so it's more work than people can do on their own.
Right, and that's another point that our audience should look at it when you're actually trying to audit a company or organization. You should definitely consider asking them if they have any good report for their device discovery or identification. If they can give you a report of their device classification, that would definitely help out.
Oh,
Now,
absolutely. And and it taking just a quick note on that is even the audit industry and our control industry has really looked at it. It's the top of the CIS controls for a reason, right? Being able to identify your devices and track them. It's one of the things. So when folks say, "Hey, we're CIS or we're following one of these standards," that's going to be a requirement.
right, yep. So I think the next question is going to be around when we have these network feed set up, and I know we talked about this when we started going around this logging, where we wanted to log everything. Now we're back to we want to capture everything in network. We want to capture absolutely everything. So I think I want to ask you a question around: are there any feed filters that people should consider, organizations should consider, and what are those, and why should they consider it?
For sure. And the thing that I look at, and you mentioned logging like I did, and we see that same cycle over and over where oh we want to log everything, and then we realize that that's too much data and the systems we have can't handle it, and so we turn those down, and now we're on the same it's the same story with networking. Some of the things to look at from a feed perspective, a lot of times unlike logging, networking is very chatty. And so if you can find a way to deduplicate your traffic, that's really the first step in your network feed. Is when a packet goes out, if TCP, they did a great job when they created the standard, right? If we don't have a good strong connection, I'll send it again. And so if you're doing your collection at a strong network point, you'll see all of that duplicated traffic over and over as the computers keep talking to each other, or if there's a network collision and they have to restart the session. And so that's one area I look at very quickly, is to understand a clean data feed is how can I reduce the amount of duplicate traffic that I have to manage, or I have to chew through when I'm doing my analysis. And then from there, now we're at Grand Central Station, right? Saying duplicates, that's an easy one. Everybody should look at that. But now it becomes a question of, do I really need to have all ICMP traffic? Is it important to me to be able to see that going across a wire, and thinking through the other side of the discussion? What will I do with that traffic once I have it? And that's a good way to approach any scenario where I'm thinking about filtering or reducing the feed, is to think through what use cases would I have, or what scenarios would I be in where I might need that traffic. And sure, we can all sit down and say there's a legitimate answer for every piece of data that's going to cross the wire. But if we think about risk versus reward, it does boil down to, well, if I have to make a choice, where am I going to get the biggest bang for the buck? And so when we look at the different capabilities of the systems we're using for monitoring, if I've got L7 protocol analysis capability in the system I'm using, or if I'm just looking at L4, layer 7 versus layer 4 in the stack, it really comes back to understanding what that data is going to feed into to help me be able to understand if I don't need it or not. Things that do get dangerous, and I just want to call this one out because it has bit a number of organizations in the past. It sometimes becomes very easy. Well, I don't need any ARP traffic, right? Who that's just noise on the network. It's broadcasts and things I don't need. But when we think about device identification and device discovery, that traffic's almost always necessary, because there's no other way for us to understand what devices are out there if we don't see who's talking to who and what they're saying. And so that's one of those where sometimes you'll think, oh, I don't need this. And then you'll turn it off. And then some downstream process may end up needing it later on. And so that's why I like to stop and think about, like I said, the use cases and how I'm going to approach what data I need, and then go from there, right? If one that I talk to sometimes is, we're on a network segment and we have a number of servers that are doing backups, and I see the backup servers constantly getting data. And that's a lot of data to chew through that's just copies of everything that's on the systems. And so I asked the question is, well, we can turn off collection of the traffic that's going over a set port or a specific protocol and not capture that backup data, but just realize, and this is where we stop and we talk to the CISO and the rest of the management team and say, are you willing to accept the risk that if something does happen to your backup systems, that we won't catch that traffic to be able to minimize what we're looking at? And so that's, if they tell me, oh, I have a separate compensating control, I have EDR on those hosts and I have other things that I can look at, then absolutely, right? Let's look at filtering that out. But it should always come back to a question of the risk of not seeing something and what other things would require that data.
And that's absolutely right. And I hope our audience is also listening and hopefully using that information if you're not implementing that in your organization already. So, Tim, we talked about TAP, we talked about span, we talked about agents, we talked about device discovery. Now, we talked about network traffic collection. What about once I have all of that traffic? What do I do with it? How do I make these actionable alerts now?
Totally.
So, yeah,
Yep.
talk to us about that a little.
And that's I have always been in the seat of an analyst for the majority of my career, where I have to ask the question, I have all these things, just like you said, now what? What can I do with it? What context is it providing? What information am I gaining? I will stop and say that everybody will groan. But when we talk about things like device discovery and identification, alerts and detection capability, we really do need to lean more on things like machine learning. It is a buzzword, and everybody says they have it and everybody does it. But with the speed and scale of what we're trying to monitor and the people that are trying to do it, there really is no way for us to be able to do all of it that's needed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, nonstop. And so while I'm a big believer in machine learning, I'm also a very big believer that it should be a form of human machine teaming, right? I have this machine that's doing a lot of this analysis and looking for outliers and anomalies and things for me, and it will surface those in a more intelligent way to an analyst or a human to look at and evaluate and understand. And then that gives the person the comfortability to know that I don't need to go inspect personally every entry for every network scan that's happened to say that scan was legitimate or that scan wasn't. I have a machine that's already doing that for me. But now that it does surface the ones that are anomalous, I think about it a lot of times. And when we think about IoT, it's really important to, when I see a network event of a host that's gone to Facebook, it's really important to know, well, was that host the receptionist at the front desk? Oh, that's probably okay. We frown on it, but it happens. Or is that host that went to Facebook, or and I think about Facebook's one that we talk about, but Twitter is actually the one that's even more concerning because we've seen command and control functions put on Twitter. So is it the receptionist at the front desk who's going to Twitter, or is it my conference phone or my printer, right, that's gone to Twitter? And so it's those types of definitions that we need to be able to introduce into our systems. And machine learning definitely helps. And being able to ask those questions. Does your organization have any activity outside of your geographic region? If not, then that's a very simple alert, right? Show me anytime any of my hosts send data to a location that's not in my geography. But the other times is with people working from home and the amount of globalization that we're seeing, those simple rules oftentimes just don't carry enough weight anymore. We can't really do that very well. And so now it really does come back to looking at things like peer grouping. All of my conference phones, they all talk to their conference phone manager server. That's normal. They all get their updates from the update server over the internet. That's normal. But this one conference phone all of a sudden has an SSH session. And so that anomalous traffic now is very, very important. And so being able to filter down and think through those, that's where security teams are really trying to get to. And like I said, the benefit of something like machine learning that can constantly do that for us is really going to shine a light on how fast and agile we can be.
We'll wrap up the session by this last question. If I'm considering for network detection and prevention, what are the integrations should I also consider? So it's not just standalone one product or solution, right? I need to consider the integrations with other, let's say, logs or actionable network alerts
For
or
sure.
anything. So what
Yep.
are the integrations I should also keep in mind when I'm considering this kind of solution?
So it's an interesting way to look at it. And so when we think about the SOC triad, and I really appreciate Gartner trying to put some rails around how these conversations happen because it helps drive us to in the right direction. So of course, you want your EDR, your NDR, and your SIM to be able to work together. That's I want to say an absolute must, but it's really where we want to be. That way, when those events are happening, we can integrate those pieces back and forth. Now, one of the topics of integration, we hear companies all the time say, "Oh, we're fully integrated." Well, and you always have to ask the question, well, what does that mean? Because fully integrated may mean, oh, I send an email over to that system and it does something, right? That's not fully integrated. We really want to look at the ways that our platforms can leverage each other for what they're strongest for. We look at things like, do I need to be able to have my network detection and response tool be able to send an alert and receive data back from something like my network access control? So that way, if I see a detection based off of that peer group analysis that I've done, I can now let the NAC go shut a port or remove that host from the network. In the same way, if I've got EDR in the environment, EDR has really provided us a lot of capability on the endpoint. And so now my network tooling can see an event, right? We see suspicious connections in via SSH. Now I can go tell the EDR, well, that host needs to be quarantined, but I don't want to completely shut it off the network. I want to be able to have it still be able to get updates or still be able to remove the files that got put there. And so having that two-way capability, right? And then having the EDR tell the network tool, hey, that action is done. And so here now you can graph out the details of the hosts that have been quarantined versus the hosts that are still on the network and so on. And so that's really where we need to look is how do we get all of our tooling to not just be able to, broadcast out details, but be able to take in information from those other tools as well. I know that there's a lot of discussion and there hasn't been too much uptake I've seen, but I've always been a big believer in something like a SOAR platform, similar to security information event management. Security orchestration is really important, and so if we can start integrating that into the process as well, it'll help those integrations across multiple platforms.
I think that's all the time we had for today, and really appreciate Tim for chatting with us about this hot topic for especially the healthcare running IoTs and how to capture network traffic for those black boxes and what to do with it. So we appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.